coming and hanging out today and talk about this draft. I think it's, it's all.
We
All right, I
lost you
just
there for a
got
second.
muted. Yeah, I
All right,
just got
there you go.
muted.
There you go.
Anyways, yeah, no, I appreciate you guys coming on. It feels like it takes forever to get to the draft. We finally made it. Excited to get it going. It feels like there's still a good bit of intrigue here at the top of the draft. It looks like kind of know where things might be headed with the first pick, and then it starts to get fun. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to hanging with you guys today, and fire away.
Great. Thank you. We will now begin the Q&A portion of today's call. If you would like to ask a question, as I've noted, many of you have done so, please use the raise hand function and we will take questions in that manner. Due to the number of people on today's call, we ask that you please limit yourself to one question. Our first question comes from Mark Maskey. You may ask your question.
And when you look at some of the decisions made by the guys, the draft decisions by the guys with college eligibility remaining, and especially the quarterbacks, just who decided to enter, who decided not to enter. How much do you think that the new economics of college football affect the draft now and the depth of the draft class, and in particular a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a big impact, and I wouldn't, say it's even specific to quarterback. I think other positions it's had a bigger impact. I think in years past, the easiest sell for an agent was to a running back, even if he had middling production, which was to say, hey, you've got to start getting paid for these carries you have in your body as soon as possible. So I thought you saw a lot of guys come out when, maybe they weren't quite ready yet. And now those kids are getting paid, either by their school or somebody else. And so they have opportunities, and that's, it's kept a lot of those kids in school. I think for the quarterback situation, again, it's more of guys that are, I think for the most part, it's guys who would have been middle, late round picks, that they're easier to sell. You're going to make more money coming back to school than you will being a 5th round pick, 6th round pick. But, I think that's a factor. I don't think like the guy that I think people would look at with this example would be Drew Aller. But I don't think that was really a financial decision. I think that was just more so him feeling like he wanted to go back to Penn State and see if they could, finish off what they got close to last year. So, I think the quarterback class this year, where it's not as star-studded, it's just that's the roller coaster. We had 6 last year. Like, there's no way you keep up that pace. So there's just going to be big years and there's going to be lean years. And I don't know if that's quite as related to the money aspect of it. It's just that's the way it's always been.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Dave Burkett. Dave, you may ask your question.
Hey DJ, appreciate your time as always here. Just wanted you to weigh in on 2 prospects if you could. First on Azaraku, is he a one-trick pony, or how do you sort of see him developing as a run defender? Maybe becoming a more complete edge player down the road. And then second, how good is Josh Simmons? Like where would he go if he were healthy?
Sure. Azaraku, it's funny when you said like kind of a one-trick pony, because one of the knocks on him is as a pass rusher that he's got too much of an arsenal. Like he almost like to see him be a little bit, more focused on just his get off winning with speed, developing a little more power. He has got all the tricks in his bag. Like he's got a million different moves, and it's why he was so dang productive this year. But when you get to the NFL, I think, incorporating more power into his game is going to be a big part of his development. In the run game, I thought he was fine. I didn't think he was just a rugged knockback, violent run defender, but he's got really, really long arms, and he can set the edge. He can lock out. He can extend. So I didn't, that he's definitely a better pass rusher at this point in time than he is a run defender, but I didn't view him as a liability in the run game at all. And then with Simmons, yeah, talent-wise, you just, if you just watch his tape, put his pure talent up there against everybody in this class, he stacks up really well. I think he'd be a 10-year starter. It's just, to me, you're going through the injury that he had and trying to navigate that. I wish it would have been great to have him healthy the whole year to see him play against the caliber of competition that they ended up going through. And I think he would have been, we'd probably be talking about him more as a lock, as a top 15 pick. If that were the case. So talent-wise, yeah, no question. This guy's he's got the ability to start in the NFL for a long time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Mike Chappell in Indianapolis. Mike, you may ask your question.
Yeah, Daniel, this is apparently such a deep draft on tight ends. How do you assess the top, I don't know, 3 or 4 guys? And what is your differentiating between Tyler Warren and Loveland? And is there a gap between those two and the rest of the group?
I think there is a gap between those two and the rest of the group. I think those two guys are two of the top, 7 players in the draft class. And it's just with them, specifically, I think it's just a flavor thing. What do you value? What do you prefer? Loveland, a little more quickness off the line, a little more quickness at the top of routes, can really create separation. Warren is just a big, massive bully who's going to wall guys off down the field. I think he's better on the move, whereas Loveland, if you're talking about, gearing down and working back to the quarterback, he's going to be a little more comfortable there. Whereas I think Warren, you run him down the seam, you're running on overs, doing those types of things, and he's a bully when the ball's up in the air, and he's a pain to get on the ground. So, it's stylistically different. I would give Warren the edge in the run game, but Loveland competes in that department as well. So, I have them touching each other on my list, not just at the tight end position, but overall. Warren's at 6 and Loveland's at 7. So then to me, there's a little bit of a drop off. And then I think there's some real interesting guys. And I think, I talked to a bunch of teams over the last couple weeks, and the longer we go through the process and guys start getting weeded out with medical character, different things that that happen this time of year. Mason Taylor to me is he's an emerging player, and that everybody's comfortable with him. He's a safe player. He's rock solid. He had a nice week at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, everybody knows about, his dad and his uncle with Jason Taylor and Zach Thomas, and the kid's been around football his whole life. But he's one of those guys when you're talking to teams, you're like, hey, if you got wiped out, who would be your guy? And well, if we got wiped out, we could just take Mason Taylor. He's going to start for us for the next, 8-10 years. It's a really steady, solid player. So I think he goes in the back half of 1. At worst, he goes early 2. And then you get a Tracy player, and Elijah Arroyo from Miami, who can really fly, who's had some injuries you got to work around. And then Harold Fannin from Bowling Green, who's got a ton of production and stepped up in big games against A&M and Penn State. And then I would say Terrence Ferguson. So I would do the tier with Warren and Loveland. I would say then you get to the Taylor, Arroyo, Fannin group, and Ferguson's right there, right behind those guys for me.
Next question comes from Jim Wyatt with the Titans. Jim, you may ask your question.
Okay, appreciate you, Daniel. I guess how certain are you about what's going to happen at 1, and then what makes sense for the Titans at 2 if you think that's kind of a slam dunk?
It sure feels like a slam dunk. I would be I'd be pretty shocked if they didn't go with Cam Ward there with the first overall pick. So then it comes to them. What's the intrigue when they get to pick number 35? I think there's a lot of different directions they could look to go there. Usually when you invest in a young quarterback, there's a commitment to try and really support him and help him on that side of the ball. You could look at the wide receiver position there at pick number 35. I look at, a guy like Higgins from Iowa State would be a fun player to drop into that mix to give him a nice weapon to play with. So, I know they have other areas they could go potentially on the defensive side of the ball, but man, when you invest that first overall pick, you want that pick to make you look smart. It tends to lead you to staying on that side of the ball once you get to the next round.
Next question comes from Dan Wiederer with the Chicago Tribune. Dan, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, always appreciate the insight. Kind of a multi-layered question here. Knowing how the top 100 of this draft sets up, how do you kind of characterize the opportunity the Bears have next week to mix and match those top 75 picks, 4 of them, and create kind of a gift basket that they feel good with? And then I guess along with that, which position would you feel most hesitant to wait on for day 2?
Ooh, that's a good one. They're in a fantastic position when you're picking 10, 39, 41, 72. They get 4 instant impact players with the way this draft shakes out. So, I'm as excited for them. We did a thing the other day on teams that have the most opportunity in this draft, and they'd be near the top of the list. In terms of positions that you probably don't want to wait on, if you're dead set on getting an offensive tackle and you want to get your long-term left tackle, you're going to want to do that with your first pick. I just don't love the possibilities of you seeing someone that's going to be an upgrade over what you have once you get into the second round of this particular draft. So that would be kind of the thought process there. If it's close with some of these other players, I could see them leaning in that direction and just checking the tackle off the list. There are backs, there are tight ends. There's a good bit of depth there. They want to reinforce the defensive line, get an edge rusher. To me, like a sweet spot for them, pick 39 for an edge rusher. If they, that's a great area to find that guy. So I think they can premier shop. You want to take one of those top 2 tight ends, I think they're more than worth going up there. Ashton Genty falls in your lap, run the card up there. They're in a great spot where they can kind of, they don't have to be aggressive with the first pick. Somebody's going to go to them there that they're going to love and is going to start for them day one and be an impact. I'm almost more excited to see what happens with their next picks because that's going to be a fun combination of players they put together. Again, to kind of reiterate what I was saying about the Titans, these teams with young quarterbacks, yeah, we can look at the defensive side of the ball and you can find holes, but at the end of next year, if Caleb Williams is taking a massive leap with Ben Johnson, I think Bears fans would be feeling pretty darn good about the direction. So that's why if it's close, I look towards that side of the ball.
Next question comes from Ben Volen with the Boston Globe. Ben, you may ask your question.
Dan, what's up, man? Thanks for doing this today.
Hey, no problem,
buddy. Have you gotten any sense that the Giants are not going to take Abdul Carter at number 3? And then just where do you see the Patriots going at 4? If not Will Campbell, is there like a pass rusher or someone you think they might target there?
Yeah, I would say I feel, I feel pretty confident that they would take Abdul Carter. I've heard nothing that would sway me away from that. The last time I talked to people in that building was before they did some of these quarterback workouts. So I'll check back in with them at the early part of next week and see if, let's be honest, they're probably ain't telling me anything anyways, but I can at least try and see what you can learn from that experience. But it feels like, Hunter 2 and then Abdul Carter 3. And then with the Patriots, I just have continually heard that offensive tackle was going to be addressed. And I've continually heard that, that's Will Campbell's spot. So teams are not universal in the slotting of these tackles. In fact, in the last 24 hours, I've talked to 3 teams who aren't in the range to take tackles, so they can give me an honest answer of how they stack these guys. And I had one team that was a Will Campbell at the top. I had one team that was Armand Membu at the top, and I had one team that was Kelvin Banks at the top. So it's not universal around the league, but the feeling in talking to folks is that Will Campbell is really well liked inside that building in New England.
Thank you. Next question comes from John Glennon in Nashville. John, you may ask your question.
Daniel, thanks for the time. Question for you in regard to the Titans and maybe wide receiver. I know you mentioned Higgins earlier. Who are some of the guys, wide receivers, that might be available at 35? And how much of a drop-off do you think there is at wide receiver sort of around that area? And then maybe last, just Luther Burden. I wonder if you could talk about the production decline this year and maybe what the reasons are there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because that was the first name I was going to tick off. I mentioned Higgins the last time this came up, and to me, I have Luther Burden just ahead of him. So Luther Burden, I think there's a real chance he could be there at that point in time. The production did dip, and due, somewhat to the quarterback play that was a little bit up and down. The offense just wasn't, what it had been previously. I didn't see any decline in his skills. As a player, he reminded me a lot of Steph Diggs, coming out of Maryland. And Stephon Diggs was just so quick at, just getting away from people, separating from people. And then with the ball in his hands, could make some things happen. He's outstanding. One of the best run after catch receivers in this draft, if not the best run after catch receivers in this draft. So I think that would make a lot of sense. I think that'd be a value pick for them there. And somebody who, with Cam Ward, 2 things: let them grow together, which I love, and also get a chance to, give him some easy completions and pile up some yards after the catch. So that one I would think would be an outstanding value find if he were to be there at that point.
Next question comes from Chase Goodbread. Chase, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, hope you're doing well. Just want to ask you a little bit about Jaylen Milro at Alabama. What are the areas of improvement do you think he needs to make? And do you see him as a good candidate for a guy to sit for a year as a rookie, given the turnovers that he had at Alabama? And I guess lastly, do you have a comp for him?
Yeah, it's hard to find a comp for him. I can start there. He is an elite runner. If you just did a cut up and just with the ball in your arm and running, and you stacked him up with a really, really good running back class, just looking at him just as a runner, he would not look out of place at all. Like, he is dynamic. He can make you miss. He can break tackles. Like, there is zero question that he's going to have an impact with the ball under his arm. In terms of the things that to work on with him, he's not consistently connected between his eyes and his feet. That impacts his accuracy. The decision-making, you referenced the turnovers, that's, to me, that comes with playing, that comes with learning. Being in a little different system this year, that didn't go quite as smoothly as you would have hoped. I do think he needs time. I do think he requires patience. And talking to teams, though, if you were to use the phrase with him that's used more than any other, of all the quarterbacks in this draft, that's the lottery ticket. Like, if you want to just take a lottery ticket that you could hit huge on, if it all works out and it all comes together, he's got the highest upside of anybody in this draft, and that goes all the way up to Cam Ward at number 1. But he is a long way from getting there. So it's to me, it's a classic second-round pick. You get your first pick in the bag, you feel comfortable about it. It's a double off the wall. And then now you can stop choking up and you can swing for the fences with Jaylen Milro. So that's how just about everybody universally views him. So, we'll see where he ends up going. And in terms of a comparison, the only thing I could say is, like, as a runner, he's as impressive as Lamar Jackson was as a runner coming out. Lamar was light years ahead of him in terms of the passing game at that point in time. And Lamar's continued to just improve each and every year in that department as well.
Next question comes from Eric Branch. Eric, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, writing a story about this being such a consequential draft for the 49ers, given the way the offseason went, and they might really need rookies to actually play. And just like, based on Lynch and Shanahan's draft history, should the fan base feel good about that? Because you can look at Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster and Javon Kinlaw and Trey Lance and say, oh, this is, they don't know how to do this. And then you can look at George Kittle and Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw and Brock Purdy and Deommodore Lenoir and say, they're brilliant. So I guess what I'm asking is, how would you kind of assess their draft history and, what's at stake here?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting case. They have done as well as anybody outside the first round of finding not just like starters, but all pro impact caliber players. So to me, it seems like a pretty simple formula where you want more shots at it than less, given their track record and their history. And, I haven't pulled the exact numbers, but they have a boatload of picks in next year's draft because of the guys that they lost, when you add up the comp picks. So they're going to have a lot of shots at it next year. They're armed with a good number of picks this year, and I would not be surprised at all where they're picking. They're sitting there picking at number 11. If anybody wants to call and come up, I would think they would be more than willing to slide back and get more picks and take more shots at it. But to your point, they're going to need these young guys to get on the field and play. The one thing, I would, mention as well is there's two sides of it. There's the evaluating and projecting talent, which you can say has been a little bit up and down with them. But the other side of it is developing them once they get there. And I think they're outstanding at doing that. And to me, having Robert Saleh back there is going to be big for him to work with some of the young guys they'll bring in on the defensive side of the ball to get them prepared and ready to go. But yeah, the history or the future of their organization, I'm sure they'll end up getting the Brock Purdy thing done here before too long. And then it's going to come down to the importance of them hitting on their draft picks, just as the Rams have done inside their own division, where they've been stellar and really kind of flip their roster from old to young really, really fast.
Next question comes from Ray Fittipaldo in Pittsburgh. Ray, you may ask your question.
Daniel, when teams look back and self-evaluate their drafts, 3 to 5 years later, what are some of the benchmarks that they're hoping to hit? What constitutes a good draft?
Yeah, I always use it, as the number of starters you can pull from a draft. And I think 3 would be kind of the target. You get 3 starters in a draft and a couple other contributors. That's a really good draft. You get 4 starters, that's outstanding. To me, that's kind of that's a little bit of the benchmark. We used to always look at guys who were still in the league. We would do studies on that. So, guys you took in the 6th, 7th round, maybe, where your roster is, they didn't, they weren't able to stick, but you evaluated the talent correctly, that those guys have, made it on other teams and they found a way to survive in the NFL for a while. That's usually a pretty good sign that you're doing the right process and you're doing it the right way.
Next question comes from Robert McMenamin. Robert, you may ask your question.
DJ, know me better as Bob, I'm sure. Thanks for doing this. Everybody loves the first round, but a lot of teams win or lose on day 2. Can you talk about the valuableness of day 2, and what do you like at 47 and 78 for the Cards?
Yeah, I love the second round. The second day really is, to me, it's the best bang for your buck because the cost is significantly less. And I don't know that the odds are that much worse in terms of finding guys that can start for you and can have an impact. So it's literally a value. And it's in a draft like this, I would love to be, maintaining a lot of shots there in the 2nd and 3rd round. I think you're going to find steady guys. I don't know there's that much difference in those numbers to what you're looking at there in the teens in this year's draft. So if we're looking at the Cardinals and they're picking 47 and 78, I don't think you're going to find a tackle to your suiting there that you're going to love. I do think you could find an interior offensive lineman that's a good player. Sabanaya from Arizona at 47. He might go a little bit before that, but that's a possibility. Kind of in that range would give you an interior offensive lineman. If you wanted to go with an edge rusher to throw in the mix at pick number 78, I think you've got a lot of interesting options at that point in time. You got Swenson from LSU. He could go a little bit before then, but he's around that range. Look at a guy like Jordan Birch, who's kind of polarizing out of Oregon. I think that's around where he would go. Oladejo from UCLA. There's some interesting edge guys there if you want to find one of those in the 3rd round. So I wouldn't mind them going in the trenches and finding an offensive lineman in round 2 and then go see if you can find one of these edge rushers where there's some depth there in round number 3.
Next question comes from Jeff Duncan in New Orleans. Jeff, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. Thanks again for doing this. Kind of a big picture question. Jeff Ireland and his staff down here kind of polarizing right now with the fans. And I'm trying to get a gauge on how they've done over the years. And one thing that stands out, they had a lot of early success in 16 and 17. Then kind of went through a dry spell there for a few years and kind of rebounded last year. I'm curious, how do you explain disparate results from drafts from year to year when it's the same evaluators and staff basically conducting the same evaluation process? And then also, I'm curious, in your opinion, can evaluators and scouts go through quote unquote slumps in the draft? Mm-hmm. I'd like to get your thoughts.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of teams that you think about it. You go back, we used to do these studies and go back and look at teams that had been on runs, a team that had been on like a 5 or 6 year run of success. And we could almost always pin it to one draft. You could go back and find one draft where they just knocked it out of the park. Seattle and their run, they had that one draft where they got all those guys and kind of crushed it off of that. I remember going back to the early 2000s. Chargers team had like a 2 year run where they just loaded up their roster. Think about the Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson and that group of guys that they had come through there, and that set them on a run. It's so hard to maintain it. New Orleans, that draft that they had, when you look at what was it, Ramczyk and Kamara and all those guys that they were able to haul in, like they shoot, that sets you up. It's impossible to do it year after year after year. The Ravens are probably, one of the best at it. They've been pretty consistent. They've also had a lot. I think they've had the most comp picks of anybody. So they've had more picks. So you get more cracks at it. So it's still, it's so hard to do this consistently. It's inexact. So yeah, I think that's natural that you're going to have some ups and downs. I would also say when you have an elite Hall of Fame quarterback, it makes a lot of those picks, play above their level as well. And they've been navigating waters without that the last couple of years.
Thanks.
Next question comes from Daryl Ledbetter in Atlanta. D, you may ask your question.
Yeah, DJ, thanks for doing this. It's my annual question on
pass rusher.
Pass rusher, yes. I'm figuring Abdul Carter and Jalen Walker are gone. What does it look like after that? And then how do they square Green and Pierce's off the field issues?
Yeah, I mean, they've got to do their homework on those guys and get comfortable with it. I don't get all the information that these teams get. So, they've got to bring them in, be around them, talk to everybody around them and figure out whether they're comfortable with those situations. But as a player, and I look at guys that would fit them and I think would be, as football players, would be really, really productive. Mike Green, to me, he's a skilled, gifted pass rusher who can win, with speed and with power. So, between him and Pierce, I would lean towards Green in that conversation. I'm curious to see with Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M is easily the most polarizing edge rusher in this draft. I mean, he is the ultimate example of traits versus production. He has got all kinds of twitch. He's explosive. He's disruptive. He just hasn't been able to, to finish, to compile sacks. But more and more teams don't really, they aren't focusing quite as much on the sack number as they are on win percentage, pressure percentage, where he's more than functional there. He plays really, really hard. He would, he would be an interesting one I would keep an eye on. I would not rule out, but there are teams with wildly different grades on him. Top 10 grades, second round grades, like that type of a range. But I would think he'll definitely be in that conversation.
Next question comes from Sam Fortier with Washington Post. Sam, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, a little bit of a out of the box one, but I'm curious if mock drafts have become more popular during your time doing this. And what is your process like to put together your final one?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a billion of them. So yeah, it's become a heck of a lot more popular. From when I started scouting in Baltimore in 2003, I mean, there was like, you would wait, there'd be you'd get one mock draft every couple weeks. They didn't exist. It was very few. It was Mel, and I think Todd was probably doing one back then, but there weren't nothing like there is now. So there's a million of them. I always look at it like the first, all the mock drafts until the last one, you're going off a little bit of what you hear. I mean, I always go off what I hear, not what I would do. I should preference that. But to me, the accuracy and which information you're getting a month before the draft, there's not much there. So you're just looking at different scenarios. Oh, what if this were to happen, then how would that impact the rest of it? Whereas you get to the last one, at that point in time, I've talked to, a lot of folks and gathered a lot of information, and I'm trying to just go off of, what I hear, and then looking at the historical stuff that they've done, marrying that with their needs, what's been said publicly by coaches and general managers. So I put all that into it. And then at the end of the day, you get like 7 out of 32 and you just go, okay, well, what was that all for? But it's all part of that exercise. I think it's fun. Teams, you'd be shocked how many teams call and want to know who you think certain people are taking. So I enjoy it. It's a fun game, but it's darn near impossible.
Next question comes from Ed Valentine with Big Blue View. Ed, you may ask your question.
Abdul Carter. Hello.
What you got, you, Ed?
Yeah, hey, you talked about Abdul Carter at 3 for the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
So much talk with New York about quarterbacks. Who do you see as fits for, Brian Daboll and the Giants at quarterback, later in the draft? Who would be the guys you would favor for them?
Yeah, I've been saying the same thing with them, and that to me, a draft I would love for the Giants is if they were to put Abdul Carter, select him, get him on board. And then after that, you're trying to find somebody who fits you without having to give away the farm to go get him. I have Shedeur as my number 2. I wouldn't have a problem if they, tried to move up a little bit to get him, but parting with massive resources to vault way back up there. I don't know that I would love that. Jackson Dart, to me, just from a fit, a little more physical, a little bit more arm. He doesn't have a huge arm, but a little bit more arm playing in that stadium, in that division, and the weather you might encounter. I thought that one would not necessarily require a huge cost to move up. If they were to, for instance, if they just wanted to get up in front of Pittsburgh and get to 20, the cost would be a 2, one of their 3s this year, and a 5. They still have another 3 left. So you could conceivably come out of your first 3 picks with Abdul Carter, arguably the best player in the draft. Everybody would say one of the 2 best players in the draft. A quarterback of the future in Jackson Dart, who you don't necessarily have to start right away, and then whoever you would find there in the 3rd round. That's, to me, is a really nice haul for the Giants.
Next question comes from Jory Epstein. Jory, you may ask your question.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for doing this. Most of today's NFL quarterbacks did not play high school football running the wing T, but Cam Ward did just that. Do you have a sense of how rare the wing T to first-round pick journey is for today's quarterbacks? And how do you think that high school background influences Cam's play style?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd have to go back, but I want to say Josh Allen did a little bit of that in high school as well. I think he ran the ball quite a bit. So I've heard of it before, of other guys who've been stuck in it. It used to happen a lot more in the past. It's a different era now, and everybody's in 7-on-7. Everybody's spreading people out and throwing it in high school. So it's definitely happened in the past. But I do think it does inform some of your toughness. I always like it when you get quarterbacks that maybe didn't go to the powerhouse high school and they got to play both sides of the ball. Maybe they're playing safety, or, some of them are big enough where even playing linebacker. But yeah, you're more comfortable with contact. He's someone that when I go through and watch his tape, one of the things I loved most about him was his ability to pull through tackles. Like, you get guys that'll get free runs at him, and he's able to just kind of shrug them off and pull through tackles. For a guy who's not 6'5", 240 pounds, he's really, really strong. So, yeah, I think that's it's a great point. When you play in that type of an offense, you're going to be a little bit more rough and tumble, a little more rugged, and there's absolutely no fear in what he's doing out there.
Next question comes from Parker Gabriel with the Denver Post. Parker, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, appreciate your work. Sean Payton and George Payton have talked a lot about the different types of running backs in this class, and have sort of talked about looking for a guy that can play on 3rd down and, manage all 3 downs. For you, whether it's a 20, 51, or in your trade back scenario, a little bit in between, who's a guy, if it's not Genty or Hampton, who do you like there? Or maybe it just is as simple as Omarion Hampton.
Yeah, Omarion Hampton can do all those things. To me, Travion Henderson would be a heck of a weapon. We've seen Sean with running backs like that. To me, I think he would be a fun one. The other one who I would look at for them, and kind of that, I want to say Sproles-ish role, but someone who would just be a nightmare out of the backfield if they want to throw the ball to the backs, which he loves to do. Jaden Blue from Texas, big time speed, and he is an excellent route runner. Bashad Smith is another one. That's 2 guys that are basically receivers that you line up at running back, and you can get them out in the route, you split them out, and they're a nightmare. Like, you can watch Jaden Blue just on angle routes. He just tears people up, and he's got big time home run speed. So those guys would be kind of like the committee fits. But if you're looking for the guys just, 1st through 3rd down, don't come off the field, can do everything. To me, I would look at Hampton, and I would look at Travion Henderson as probably being the captains of that team.
Next question comes from Stuart Jackson with the Rams. Stuart, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, appreciate your time this morning. Wanted to ask you about the Rams' options at pick 26. Seems like they, left the door open to really any possibility with the way they approached free agency. Just what do you make of that slot now, and how might they approach it given the way that they, went about free agency?
Yeah, to me, I look at the corners as being an option for them there. that one would make some sense. I wouldn't sleep on, a guy like Mason Taylor. If that was someone that they really loved and were comfortable with, they could go that route as a tight end. Trey Amos to me is a guy that just for some reason struck me as a less need type of player. He's just so consistent and so solid, can do a lot of different things. They've bought, I would say what the Rams have done, they've got a lot of guys who are just ready-made, like just polished, good football players, not getting enamored or carried away with other things, and just kind of focused, laser focused on getting guys that when you watch them on grass with pads on are really, really good, not getting too carried away or enamored with everything else. And to me, those are two guys in Trey Amos and Mason Taylor, who I feel like I know 100% who they are and what they're all about.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Q Myers in Las Vegas. Q, you may ask your question.
DJ, thanks for your time, man. All roads have led to Ashton Jeanty being the Raiders pick at number 6. One, what's the chances that he might get selected before they get that opportunity? And how much do you think that Pete Carroll and even Tom Brady in particular may be intrigued by Shedeur if he happens to slide to 6 as well?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would think with Geno that he's got a little more runway there, and knowing the affinity that Pete has for him. So I think both things can be true. I think they could like Shedeur, but then also, feel like that's not the right time to already make that move. So to me, I would have said a month ago, Ashton Jeanty will be there and he'd be a great option for him. As we come down the home stretch, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but when I listen to the guys in Jacksonville talk and you listen to the head coach and the general manager discuss what they're looking for in a player, and they talk about a statement pick and the first pick of their new regime there, and valuing the things that they're valuing in terms of the character, the competitiveness, all those things. I'm like, golly, that sounds like two players to me. That sounds like Ashton Jeanty and that sounds like Jaylen Walker. So I would not rule out the possibility that Jeanty went ahead of that pick and then he's off the board. And when I talk to, folks that, tight with those inside the Raiders organization, they've talked about the line of scrimmage has been a big focus, and man, they're in a really good spot on that defensive line if they can stay healthy. And I'm like, man, what if you added, a Mason Graham to that group and he's playing next to Wilkins and Max, and Kuntz, that's pretty fun to see what that could look like. Or, you look at it, if Jaylen Walker's there, adding just a fastball and a versatile chess piece that you could move around, those would be fun. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I'm always trying to find connections and what it could look like. And when I was talking about offensive linemen, and maybe someone who could be your long-term starter at a tackle spot, but if you wanted to, you could play him at a guard. Kelvin Banks, it's not hard to draw the line between Pete Carroll, Steve Sarkisian, and Kelvin Banks. So that's another one I just kind of was thinking about.
Next question comes from Antoine Staley. Antoine, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, the Jets need a tight end help. They also need right tackle help. If you could just kind of analyze just the debate there at 7, and if the Jets were to take a tight end at 7, just some of the options at right tackle later on day 2.
Yeah, I think you're gonna be in a good spot there to get somebody that comes right in and makes an impact and starts. They could kind of put the finishing piece on the offensive line with someone like Membu, he'd be comfortable, just plug him right in at right tackle. He'd be very comfortable there. And all of a sudden now what was, an endless journey to fix the offensive line, you could almost say is pretty complete with him. To me, as a player, just as simply how you grade him, I'd have both those tight ends over him. So if they want to stay best available and stay true to the board, I would take Tyler Warren, and I wouldn't hesitate to take Colston Loveland either. I think both those guys are worthy of being selected there. If they did go with a tight end there and took the highest available player, you start looking at the tackles once you get to, the next round. So let's see, where were they picking here? And they are picking 42. Man, it's going to be, I don't think you're going to love the tackle options that are going to be there at that point in time at pick 42. I think Simmons is gone. I think Connerly's gone. So now you start getting into, like Ozzie Trapillo is maybe a starting right tackle. It's probably a little bit early for him. Emory Jones is a possibility from LSU. You've got like a big upside play and a raw player in Charles Grant from William and Mary, but I think he's probably more of a third round guy who's going to take some time. So, if you're looking at trying to package the two together, I would like the tight ends I would be looking at in the second round more than I would like the tackles. So that could inform their decision that they say, hey, let's just solve the offensive line once and for all, be done with it. I mean, you take, Armand Mimbu or if you took Banks, one of those guys, now we've solved the offensive line. And now you're looking at like an Arroyo from Miami in the second round, which would be, would be an upgrade over anybody they have at that position at tight end.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Joe Cook. Joe, you may ask your question.
Hey, well, how you doing, Daniel?
Doing great.
Just a quick question about the Ole Miss prospects. I know a lot of talk about Walter Nolan and Trey Amos and those guys. What kind of impresses you most about these group of prospects about the coming out from Ole Miss? And do you think Nolan is the first rebel off the board?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting between Nolan and Dart. I would lean towards Nolan being the first one to go, and he's probably the twitchiest D tackle in this draft. So if you're looking for a pass rushing 3 technique, he's going to be the one that I think you're going to get fired up on. So, I think he'll, more than likely hear his name called in the teens, in the early 20s, probably at the latest. Jackson Dart is, I think to me, it probably starts at 20. I mean, I guess there's some thought out there, maybe the Saints could take him at 9. That would surprise me. I would think more, maybe it's a trade up in front of Pittsburgh. That would be where the ride could start. And then I think the ride would end in the early part of the second round once the Browns and the Giants have made their next picks. So that's the range for Jackson Dart. Trey Amos, I think, has got a really good shot of going in the bottom half of the first round. He's had a good process. He ran well, which was the, kind of the only question mark on him. He answered that. And then you've got all these defensive linemen that come into the mix. JJ Pegues is real versatile, does everything, does on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. I think he's, kind of in that third round range. You've got Uman Mielen is probably in that same type of range. Trey Harris, the wideout, could sneak into 2, but, I think most teams have him more in the third round. You got Pooh Paul's probably in that third, fourth round range. So, I mean, they've got a ton of guys, man, a ton of players. They're going to be, I think the sweet spot for the Ole Miss players, you'll see a couple of those guys go early, and then they're just going to be littered all throughout the third and fourth round.
Next question comes from Alan Alford. Alan, you may ask your question.
I appreciate you doing this, Daniel. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And the question is, with the 19th pick in the draft, who should the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select and why?
Ooh, okay. I like that one. I'm going to go with an edge rusher for Tampa. I'm going to say they lean towards, productive guy and someone that I think could, kind of fit and grow with that team. That's a good team. I saw them last year and I thought that was, one of the most physical teams in the NFL. But I think to me, adding another edge piece makes a lot of sense. And I'll go with Azaraku from Boston College. I just think all the production, I think Jason Light values that. I think he'd appreciate that. They went last year and when you get the center from Duke who comes in and it's just, I mean, he's so polished and so smart and so tough. And obviously the talent is there with Graham Barton, but all those intangible things I think were what led to him just having such an immediate success once he got on the field there. I think with Azaraku, there's a very similar wiring with him. He's a really smart kid. He's someone I think is going to pick up what they're doing defensively really fast and could have an impact.
Next question comes from Mookie Alexander. Mookie, you may ask your question.
Here we go. Good afternoon.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. Happy Friday. So last time we did this conference call, it was right before the NFL Combine, and the Seahawks still had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett on the roster, and they also had Geno Smith, but all of them are gone. Roster, and the Seahawks have since signed Sam Darnold in free agency, and then from the wide receiver standpoint, they've signed Cooper Kupp and Marquez Valdez-Scantling in free agency. So my question to you is, Seattle's only receivers under contract through 2026 are Kupp and Jackson Smith and Jigba. So are there any receivers from this class, particularly ones in that day 1 to day 2 projected range, who stand out to you as potential fits and draft targets for Seattle's offense? Or alternatively, could you see Seattle making a play for a major receiving tight end like Colston Loveland, or going for, say, Arroyo or Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, with where they're picking, if one of those tight ends, one of those top 2 tight ends were to get there, I think I would have a hard time passing on them just for the value that they represent. But, to me, if I was saying building out this team, where would you feel that they need to go? To me, interior offensive line early would be more of a focus. If I'm just looking at it and I want to feel comfortable, I look at a couple guys. Gray Zabel, if he was there, I think would be a great fit. Not only can he, come in and start right away, he's going to allow you to get your best 5 guys on the field because of his versatility. So you get injuries throughout a season, I think that would be a valuable chess piece for him. I would be more inclined, if you're going to look at a receiver for them, when you're looking at 50 and 52, that would probably be more the range I'd be looking to address that room. And I think there'll be good value there with some really solid options. Jack Besh, the people have compared him to Cooper Kupp, because of just the toughness and all that. I think that's, the competitive side of that comparison. I get someone who could play over the top as well and go get the ball. I think he would be a fun one to add to their mix. I'm looking more for guys that are going to play on the outside. So Jack Besh would be one. Torrey Horton from Colorado State would be another one who can get down the field and is a home run hitter who also has some big time punt return value. Just you got to go back to 23 to watch him. He just wasn't healthy at all this year. And Kyle Williams from Washington State, that would not be a long drive, and that would be a big impact. He's a really, really good player. So I'm kind of, it's fun. This is why I love doing this call, because you start thinking about teams outside of the first round and who could, match their needs. And I think the Seattle receiver need marries up really well with where they're located in the second round.
Thank you.
Nick, next question comes from Nick Kosmeter with The Athletic. Nick, you may ask your question.
Hi, DJ. Thanks for your time. I think earlier you laid out a scenario in which the if the Giants wanted to get to 20 where Denver is, 34, 65, and then their fifth rounder as well. Do you see the Browns as a potential for that same sort of move? And Sean Payton typically has not moved back in the first round. I don't know if he ever has, but what in this particular scenario would you like about that move for Denver based on their needs and what that package would give them where they're selecting?
Yeah, that's an interesting point on Sean. To be honest, the fascinating thing to me is with Cleveland and the Giants, if they don't take quarterbacks at 2 and 3, not only would they both potentially be looking to move up, they both have darn near identical draft capital. They each have an extra 3rd round pick. So trying to, you find out, and it's almost a game of chicken of who's going to pay the biggest price and how much do they love, one of these quarterbacks. And I don't even know that they like the same quarterbacks. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But if you can't get to Denver from those teams, I'd be calling up ahead of them and see if you can't get, a spot or 2 in front of them as well. In terms of what would be there if Denver were to slide back, I think you're looking at, to me, like a guy like Quinshon Judkins would come into play. To me, there's not much difference between Quinshon Judkins' grade and where I have him in like the early 30s on my list versus the 13th player on the list. Like there's not tremendous drop off there. So I think you could find a big time running back at that time and get a lot of value. I also wouldn't rule out in these trades, if they do happen, if these teams are looking to the future, and looking to acquire picks in the future years. So if I'm Denver, say, you're looking at Travion Henderson or trade back, and I love Travion Henderson, but if they don't take Travion Henderson, they trade back, you get his teammate in Quinshon Judkins, who's a really good player, and I get a future pick next year. Maybe it's a 2. I'd have to think long and hard about that.
Next question comes from Authentics with Bleacher Report. You may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, question about the New York Giants at pick 3. With the dilemma of either going BPA or going quarterback there with Shedeur Sanders, I'm wondering if, although you did say Abdul Carter seems to be the pick, do you think that the Giants might be leaning towards any preference of the best player available there with Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter? And do you think if the workout yesterday with Shedeur Sanders insinuates maybe there's a little bit of a divide in the front office with the Giants?
Yeah, I'll start at the end there. Like I talked to somebody in their front office, over a week ago, and he had told me about this workout that was coming up. So I think some people maybe misunderstood that a little bit of like, oh, this is a last minute, like, let's get out there and work this guy out. With the calendar and these kids taking visits to other schools and having workouts, I think this is just kind of where it landed on the calendar, but I think it had been planned for quite some time. I don't know. I couldn't tell you with any certainty that they're going to take Abdul Carter or they're going to take a quarterback or what their mindset is there, other than the fact that, they said at the press conference the other day, they're comfortable lining up and playing with what they have with Russell and, and with Jameis. So I don't, to me, it didn't sound, there's no reason to, kind of hide it. I don't see Cleveland trading out to get away from, somebody coming up in front of you to take somebody. I think Cleveland's going to take Travis Hunter. It feels pretty at this point in time, pretty locked in with 1 and 2. So I just wouldn't see the need to address it that way. So I'm leaning towards them taking a non-quarterback there, and Abdul Carter seems to be the obvious pick, but I think they would like to come out of this draft with a quarterback at some point in time. It's just a matter of how aggressive they want to be.
Next question comes from Dan Ralph. Dan, you may ask your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Daniel, as always. I'm going to ask you the Canadian question. I wonder if I could just get you to go through what your thoughts are on Alec Ayermanor, Curtis Rourke, and Taylor Alergsma, the kid from Laurier who went to the Senior Bowl, and what your thoughts are on them and where I might be working on the draft on Friday or Saturday regarding those three.
Well, there you go. Alergsma, to me, let's start there. I think most teams have him as an undrafted free agent. He did flash a little bit at the Senior Bowl, so I think that created some intrigue that maybe he could hear his name called, in the 6th, 7th round. But I think the more likely scenario is that he's going to end up being a free agent, somebody that teams would love to work with, and have some practice squad opportunities there. Ayermanor to me is most teams, and I have him. Let me pull up where I got him here. Yeah, to me, he's like in my 4th round range. And I think there's a chance with other teams he could end up sneaking into the 3rd round, but I think that's probably his range of where he'll end up going. Fun player to watch. I think we talked about it before, but of all the receivers, the 23 game against Colorado is probably one of the best tapes of any of these wide receivers. So he's got a ton of burst and speed. He's got size. Has some contested drops, some contact drops, which is an area that you'd like to see him improve on. But I think that's probably the range for him. And then let's get to Rourke. Let's see. Most teams that I've talked to on him have the same, similar grades to what we discussed earlier. He's coming off the injury. You're looking at a 6th, 7th priority free agent type grade, but someone who's all day tough, obviously playing what he played through. Good in the RPO game. Just, there's just not a ton of life on the ball. That's probably a little bit of the combination of the age, durability, and not having a huge arm. I think it's probably he's towards the end in terms of the draft or as a priority free agent.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Next question comes from David Ferrones. David, you may ask your question.
Hi, DJ. For the Miami Dolphins, with this latest development that they're looking to trade Jalen Ramsey, do you think finding a quality starting corner for years to come now becomes the utmost priority for them in this draft? Like, do they have to snag either Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron? And if it doesn't go that way in round 1, how much do you like those corners who figure to go in the 2nd, if you could maybe break down the different possibilities there?
Yeah, I don't think that they're, I don't think they're one position, one player away in terms of like we have to draft a corner and that's the last piece of our puzzle here. I think they can be a little bit more best player available, with where they're looking at that point in time. This, it'd be curious to see how they would have the corners versus the safeties stacked because, there's 2 really, really good safeties in this draft. So that could be an area that they look. Is it Emanwari? Is it Malaki Starks? How do those guys stack up? And Will Johnson's got a wide range. He could be gone. He could slide into the early 20s. So if he's there, how do they view him as a fit? I don't think he's a press man, leave him alone corner. It would be interesting to see how they value that with the safeties versus the corners. And if you're looking at corners in the 2nd round, they're picking 48. So if I go and look at the guys who I think have a chance to be there, who could be some impact players, Ben Morrison would never be there in a million years if he was healthy, but hurt his knee in October, so he's not been healthy through the process. But the corner out of Notre Dame would be a heck of a value at that point in time. You start getting into Ravel from East Carolina, another one coming off of a torn ACL. So those are two guys that you might get some value on because of them dropping a little bit because they didn't have a healthy process. So those are a couple options there if you're looking at pick 48. And then just for fun, if you're looking at pick 98, I still think there's quality players available. Noel Williams from Cal, I love. Darian Porter, he could be in around that range, who's a height, weight, speed corner from Iowa State. Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. I think there's a good group. I would not feel at all, when you go through that little exercise that you have to take a corner to replace Jalen Ramsey in the first round. I think you can find other guys you can plug in there on day 2.
Next question comes from Carter Owen. Carter, you may ask your question. Carter? All right, we'll move on to the next. Next question comes from Jimmy Kempsey. Jimmy, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel. Excuse me. What's your perception about how much teams value the 5th-year option? You mentioned, teams like the Giants, Browns, others potentially moving up from round 2 into round 1 for a quarterback. What do you think the likelihood is of, that? And then, for some of the second-tier quarterbacks in this class, and if you're one of the playoff teams at the back of round 1, should you expect to be paid a premium to give up that 5th-year option?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I've never thought of it from that standpoint of having to pay a premium. But it's a good point. It makes sense. I try and reverse engineer it when you talk to agents, and none of them want to go with the 31st or 32nd pick. So that's usually a sign that there's a pretty good advantage in the 5th-year option in terms of the team side. So yeah, with a quarterback specifically, just wanting some cost control there, I think it makes a lot of sense. And if you had to pay, I don't think you're paying a steep premium, but if that goes from, one of the secondary picks being a 5th-round pick instead of a 6th-round pick, I think you could probably pull that off if you're one of the teams in the 30s of asking for that because of the value of the extra year. So, I don't know that at other positions it's quite as important, but I think the quarterback numbers have just gotten so astronomical that if you're able to actually hit on the guy, that extra year is pretty important. So, I think that's fair. I've never thought about the premium side of it. That's a great point. Yeah, if I was Howie Roseman, I might ask for a little bit extra sugar on top.
Next question comes from Jonas Schaefer with Baltimore. Jonas, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. Following up on the question that you got about mock drafts earlier, with all the information that's out there, some of it good, some of it bad, how much does that kind of factor into how teams make their big boards, where they decide to actually take certain guys relative to where maybe they have them on their own board? And I guess what kind of separates the good process from bad process in that whole consideration?
Yeah, that's to me, I always tell people during this time of the year, I wake up, I have coffee, I field 3 phone calls and try and decipher the 9 lies I was just told. So there's so much information. I think the main goal of teams, when I talk to general managers, it's not, they kind of want to know, where you think ranges of where players are going. They're not going to adjust how they rank their own players. But what happens is everybody has a different board. So if you're picking 25 and your 8th player might not be, they want to know what the rest of the league thinks of their guys. So if you're kind of going through everybody and their 8th player is not, is not loved around the league, and there's, everybody thinks he's a 2nd-round player or what have you, then they're more patient to wait and see if they could get their 8th-ranked player at pick number 25. But once they start realizing, man, the rest of the league has very similar feel on our players, we don't want to get wiped out. I've been on teams where we've picked it, like, say we've picked 22, and we've taken our, ninth best player at 22. I've been on teams where we picked in that same range, like say the same number, 22, and we've got our 21st player. We just got wiped out completely. So you're just trying to find out, man, if there's a chance we could get our 8th player at 14 or 15, like, okay, we'll go get him. Like, who are you willing to travel for? And that's a meeting that teams have at the end of the process. You got your entire staff in there, and the teams I was on, we would go through and say, okay, here's our list of players, guys. We have them all stacked up. They're ranked. Who are the guys you guys would be willing to be aggressive on? Like, who do we have complete conviction in? And if he got in range, like, let's do it. Let's go get him. That's what that is. So they're not adjusting their ranking. They're just trying to figure out if there's a chance they could get one of their premier players and move up.
Next question comes from Andrew Mason. Andrew, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. Following up on the Broncos and Omarion Hampton from earlier, given where that team is, playoff team, young quarterback, good defense, is Hampton that much better a fit to where he's worth them considering a trade up? Or with the running back class, is it better to let the board fall as it may because of the depth and quality available this year?
Yeah, before free agency, I would have told you if the Denver Broncos were going to be ultra aggressive and trade up for somebody, it would be Colston Loveland. He just is a great fit for what Sean Payton does and just seemed like an obvious one. Now they went out and picked up Evan Ingram and gave him some decent money. So that might take that off the table, but I'm still got that in the back of my mind of, man, that's just still such a good fit. So I know that's not the position you're referencing, but that's one that it still has my ears perked up to see what happens there. On the running back side of it, man, I love Travion Henderson as well. So, Omarion Hampton would be a unbelievable pick there, but I think there's enough guys and there's enough depth at this position that I don't know that you would necessarily have to do that. I think you can kind of let and see how it falls at that specific position. But, I don't know why I just keep coming back to the Loveland thing, thinking that was a Sean Payton fit.
Next question comes from Matt Ryan. Matt, you may ask your question. Matt Ryan, you may ask your question. We'll move on. Next question comes from John McMullen. John, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. Thanks for doing this. Talking about Howie at 32, you mentioned Walter Nolan a little bit earlier. You had him going. What do you think the range is, though? Is he somebody who could, if one or two teams decide to go in a different direction, could he fall that low?
I would say it's unlikely that he falls that low. He's just too explosive in a passing league. I can't see him getting there, but if you would ask me if Nolan Smith was going to get there, I would have said no. If you'd asked me if Cooper DeJean was going to be there in the second round, I would have said no. So look, you always prepare for it and you always be pleasantly surprised of who falls. But I would not anticipate that he would drop that far. I think he could end up going, and if he went in the top 15, I wouldn't be shocked. So yeah, that one would surprise me if he made it all the way down there. In terms of the Eagles and where they could look, I just imagine in Howie's office that you just gather the offensive staff and the defensive staff, and they're just lobbying for which offense or defensive lineman they would love to have at that point in time. And I would also say, with where they are as a team and their roster, and you go through and look at it, they're in pretty good shape. They have a ton of picks. I think they have 12 picks next year. So they could be a team. We're always looking at teams looking to move back. They could be a team that, say it's him, say it's Walter Nolan is there. Maybe that's, someone they would be aggressive to move up. I wouldn't sleep on, Shamar Stewart as an explosive player that they could use and fit, that if he starts to drop, they could go up and get him. I think there's a lot of teams this draft that would like to go in reverse, and the Eagles might be one of the few teams that would really be willing to put their foot on the gas and go get somebody.
Next question comes from Jaisha Nance in Alabama. Jaisha, you may ask your question.
Yes, I wanted to ask about Malachi Moore from Alabama. What kind of player do you view him as, and what round do you think he will go in? And do you have like a certain team that would be a great fit for him?
Yeah, I mean he's a good football player. He doesn't have elite size or anything like that, but he can cover in the slot. He can play in the middle of the field. He flashes some range there in the back half. To me, the question is just how much pure makeup speed does he have? For me, the range that I have him in is kind of in that 4th, 5th round range. It's there's a good bit of safeties in that kind of clump in there, but that's about the range where I see him coming off of the board. And in terms of teams, to me, I view him more as like a third safety, third or fourth safety who's going to be a part of your sub packages and play on special teams and try and earn his way up the depth chart. So I mean, every team could use someone like him, but that's 4th, 5th round is about the range where I specifically have him.
Next question comes from Blaine Grishak. Blaine, you may ask your question.
Hey DJ, thanks for doing this. Just kind of looking at the the mid-round tight ends. How do teams kind of feel about Harold Fannin Jr. and are they as divided as kind of media is on his athleticism and his movement skills? And then kind of what separates him? How much of the gap is there between him and a guy like Mason Taylor there?
Yeah, there's teams that have Fannin over Taylor, so he's a tight end darling. There's always it's kind of like a running joke in among scouts. We always laugh about it because these position coaches go to work out players. So if you're the tight end coaches, will all kind of hop around and all go to the pro days of the top tight ends, and they're around each other a lot. And we would always joke that it's like the poster child for groupthink, where everybody kind of gets together and they all kind of have their guys that they like and then the guys that they don't like. But the consensus was Harold Fannin was the coaching favorite this year for all the tight end coaches, that they all really, really liked him. And I like him too. He's a really good player. I think he's going to go in the 2nd round when it's all said and done. Maybe the middle to the back portion of the 2nd round. When you go up against Penn State and do what he did, and then you show what against Texas A&M when you're running away from everybody, it looks a little different watching him run. It's kind of he ran 4.71, so he didn't like blow it out, but he's faster than you think, and he just has a knack for getting open, separating, and it's kind of a different looking kind of a waddle that he uses as a runner, but he covers ground and he can make people miss, and he's just excellent with the ball in his hands. So to me, I think he's at the worst case scenario top of 3, but I think he's got a good shot at going in the middle to back portion of 2.
Next question comes from Mark Weiser. Mark, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, you made a comment at the Combine about when you commit to Georgia, you get an invite to the Combine. So I want to take it to the draft now. What do you make of the number of players that have been selected the last several years from Georgia? What is it about a player under Kirby Smart and his staff that has them ready for the next level that may be specific to what they do in that program?
I think it's the practice. Honestly, I do. I just think you're seeing great players every single day in practice. And if you're not competing and focused and getting better every day, there's 10 guys behind you that are going to take your job. So that creates some urgency there. And then on top of that, you've got a staff of good, teachers. Everybody listens to Kirby and, he gets clipped off for, yelling and screaming and how intense he is. But when you listen to him and you see and you're around him, he's an excellent teacher. And so these guys come prepared. They've played in NFL schemes. It's just like the minor leagues. I mean, it's just like the minor leagues for the NFL. It's pretty incredible what they've built there. And we've seen it before. Alabama, has done that for a long time, where guys just kind of arrived. Sometimes they could be a little bit beat up because of the intensity and the physicality. But man, I feel like you're getting real dudes when you go shopping at Georgia. So I just saying they get an invite when they get to Georgia, and it's not just because of the school. They're legit dudes, and that's been reflected in how their players have been selected over the last handful of years. So yeah, I'm a big fan of their guys.
Thanks. Next question comes from NR Media. You may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. Thanks for doing this, and shout out to Andrew for setting this up. So I want to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. In my opinion, this is the most interesting team also in the draft. And As you know, they made a lot of offseason moves. So I got to ask you, what do you think they will do? Because there's Genty rumors going on and wide receiver rumors. But if Genty goes before them, I have them taking a receiver like Matthew Golden or McMillan. So what do you think the Dallas Cowboys should do with all the offseason moves and with the new regime now with the first-time head coach? And this is a big year for them too.
Yeah, I think in my last mock draft, I had him taking Matthew Golden as well. So I see the fit with you there. I think they need to upgrade that receiver room for sure. The expectation, though, and talking to folks around the league in regards to the Cowboys, is they've done a lot of work on his interior offensive linemen. I think they said the other day at the press conference they would be more likely, I don't know if it was Steven, but somebody in their press conference said they'd be more likely to trade back than to trade up, which when I hear they've done a lot of work on interior offensive linemen, I'm hearing they want to trade back. That matches, because you probably don't love the value of taking the interior offensive lineman at 12. If you can slide back a bit and still come away with a Gray Zabel, who's a plug-and-play starter to replace Zach Martin, that makes sense. I was kind of tongue-in-cheek the other day on television, but just talking about the Cowboys, like I do miss the days when they were fun and aggressive. They've done some smart. Obviously, they've drafted well. They've been smart, but for a team that hasn't been able to get over the hump, it feels like at some point in time, whether that's trading a pick for a player, a veteran, whether that's moving up in the draft, whether that's trying to amass a bunch of picks in a future draft, they've been kind of by the book, playing it by the book, and they haven't been able to get over the hump. So at some point in time, I would like to see a risk, whether that's in free agency, whether that's in trading for a player, whether that's trading up. Just it feels like they need to be a little bit more aggressive, and that's probably more so, holistically on the calendar than specifically on the draft. But Philly is, Philly's got a couple Super Bowls by being very, very aggressive, trading picks for players, going, getting an international player and develop him into a premier left tackle, going out and getting Saquon Barkley when everybody says the running backs are not valued. Like they've gone outside the box and been aggressive. And I feel like the Cowboys at some point in time, you're going to have to swing, you're going to have to take some swings.
Next question comes from Austin Parr. Austin, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time. I got a Montana State question for you.
Yes.
Tommy Malot, quarterback now, switched to wide receiver at his pro day, kind of utility guy. He proved how much of a phenomenal athlete he was at his pro day, and he's got a lot of post-pro day private workouts. What do you think of his Julian Edelman comparisons and his skill level, and what would be a great fit for Tommy?
I want to be the president of the fan club. I don't know if that honor's been bestowed on anybody, but I would like to carry that flag. I was sending some video out to GMs, maybe a couple weeks ago on him, just because he was so fun to watch run the ball. Now, he's going to be a process, as someone to develop as a receiver. But I mean, you can't test better. When he ran 4.39 and jumped 41 inches at his pro day, he's super, super explosive. As a runner, he's elusive, he's competitive, he's tough. To me, I think his immediate impact might just be as a returner, as you're trying to buy some time for him to develop as a receiver project. He's going to get picked. There's too much buzz and too much heat on him for him to slip through the draft. So I think you could see him in that, probably that 5th, 6th round range is where someone's going to take him. Everything I've got on the background stuff as a kid is off the charts. Like, great kid. They love him there. They won a lot of football games. So the Edelman thing is, I think that's kind of the North Star. Like, obviously you hit it out of the ballpark. I don't know if he's going to get to that point, but it allows you something to dream on. And at that point in time in the draft, I think he's a fun flyer to take.
Next question comes from,
appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
Next question comes from Rob with MVC 10. Rob, you may ask your question.
DJ, thanks for doing this. And what you just described, you very well may have said the same thing a year ago about Jalix Hunt. I remember Howie laughing and joking with us in the media after. So really 2 questions. One, You guys patched things up. I'm assuming you have, because you had him ranked so high when he really wanted them. And then 2, more seriously, we talk so much about players getting better due to reps.
Yeah.
Does the same exist with GMs, and how much have reps helped Howie in this heater that he's pretty much on?
Yeah, he's been on a nice run, man. I think the things I will say about Howie, like I worked with Ozzie Newsome and I've worked with Howie Roseman, and I don't know if people would, say, okay, that those guys are identical in how they approach things, but the thing that they have in common is they are both outstanding listeners. So they bring in a lot of smart people. They take in the information, they listen to it, and look, the proof is in the pudding, and what Howie's done there. I think the other thing is they have a really good scouting staff, and they've also, with a guy like Stout, when you've got Jeff Stoutland, who's an excellent, evaluator on the offensive side of the ball in the trenches, Jeremiah Washburn, who I worked with and have known forever on the defensive side, that's looked at pass rushers and been in scouting as well as on the coaching side. Like they've got coaches that know how to evaluate as well, and they know what fits what they do and how they play. So, look, I said it earlier, it's impossible to knock this thing out of the park every year. They've been on a nice run here. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to expect you're going to continue to just get year after year of this type of performance. So there'll probably be some ebbs and flows along the way. But to me, the combination of Howie being really smart, understanding the value of the board, of understanding where guys are going to fall and when to be aggressive, I think that's a key strength of his. He listens, he surrounds himself with great people, and they know what they're shopping for. So that's a recipe for success.
Next question comes from Will Birchfield. Will, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, I wanted to ask about Derek Harmon, local kid here in Detroit. Is there any scenario by which he's available to the Lions at 28? And if so, or even if they're compelled to make a move for him, how do you think his play style potentially suits theirs?
Yeah, I think there's a legit shot he's there. I think he could be in their range. I've looked at him as kind of like the floor for him. I've looked at the Lions at 28. I've looked at the Bills at 30. His potential, last line there for him to fall. That I wouldn't completely rule that out at this point in time. I think he fits. He's someone who can get up the field. He plays really, really hard. He's got good instincts. That's one thing the Lions have knocked out of the park. You look at all the guys they've added on both sides of the ball. They have majored in really instinctive, smart, aware players, and that's how Harmon plays. So ultra competitive, can get up the field, plays smart. He flashes some bull rush power. I'd like to see a little bit more of that, going forward. But this is a guy who's worked hard to change his body over the last year, 18 months, and coming off a monster year. So yeah, I think it'd be an outstanding pick at that point in time.
Next question comes from Alex Crescenti. Alex, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, I know you were on with Russillo and Todd earlier this week, and you were talking about how defensive ends, they don't always pan out for a couple of years. It takes them a couple of years to get there. Yeah. Obviously, the Lions are in this win now mode. With that 28th pick, is there anything that they can do that would either, grant them a starter or someone that could be very impactful that would end up helping them, immensely at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's a good one. Look, there's so many intriguing options and good players there, but in terms of like the stamp of immediate, big time impact, it's hard to do that at that portion of the draft. In this draft, I think there's a lot of really intriguing options and good players, but like go through the list of guys who can conceivably be there. James Pierce, of all of them, would probably, like, he has that one dominant pitch, like with his speed. I think that would translate really quickly. So that would be maybe the one, if you're looking for year one impact, I would say Pierce probably have a chance to have the biggest year one impact. Donovan Azaraku, I love as a player. He's got to work more and develop more of his power. Shamar Stewart's got all the twitch in the world, but he's got to get better at locating, finding the football, and finishing plays. Nick Scorton's kind of a wild card because it's almost like two different players. He played at 280 this year. He's 257 now, which mirrors more what he was at Purdue in 23. But he might not have the highest ceiling, but if I'm looking at your question, he would be another one who I think come in. You're going to get probably the best of Nick Scorton right as soon as he gets there, and someone who I don't think is going to be a 13, 15 sack guy eventually, but someone who I think could be a steady 7 to 10 sack performer who's going to be physical and set the edge, and kind of the rugged nature he plays with kind of matches there. So that could be, that could be an option.
Next question comes from Scott Morganroth. Scott, you may ask your question.
Hi, Dan. Good to see you. I cover the Miami Hurricanes. We had like 20 guys work out for us. So with that said, I want to talk about Xavier Restrepo, Cam Ward's top receiver. Where do you think he's going to end up going in the draft? We have a kicker, Andy Borregales, who's pretty good. But please answer the Restrepo question. And do you see a lot of other Hurricanes being on NFL rosters as time goes on? Because we have a lot of talent down here with Mario Cristobal.
Yeah, Mario's done a great job. He's, and everything I've heard from, and I've talked to Mario, but everybody I've talked to that is around him on a day-to-day basis says you will not find a guy who works harder, is more intense, and especially with recruiting and how he goes about it. Like he's done a great job of getting that program going. With Restrepo, he's a tough evaluation. It's hard to hide. I know he wasn't right, feeling great with the 4.85 on the pro day. That was tough, but someone who's really, really, he's quicker than fast when you watch him play, really instinctive, settle in zones. He's, slippery with the ball in his hands. He's got excellent ball skills. It's just a matter of, okay, he's not going to play outside. He has to play inside. And how well is that going to translate when you don't have that big time speed? So he's someone I think is going to be a day 3 pick at this point in time in the process. We'll see how high up in that range he could go. I would say, man, the 5th round would probably be about where I would guess he comes off the board, in that range. There's other really good players there, though. One guy who had an excellent workout, who's, I would say, helped himself the most from all-star games to the, through the process of the combine. Tyler Barron probably went from a 5th or 6th round pick to a 3rd or 4th round pick as an edge rusher. When you're almost 6'5", you're darn near 260, and you run the low 4.6s, and you flash, which is what he is. He flashes, with a shake bull rush power. He can dip at the top of his rush. He does a good job of just kind of shooting gaps and making plays against the run. But I think he's helped himself a ton. Damian Martinez ran better than a lot of people anticipated as a big back. He ran 4.51 at 217 pounds. He's just been productive throughout his career at Oregon State and over to Miami. So Jalen Rivers is an intriguing, inside, outside, could play guard, can play tackle. He's just a massive human being. So he's going to be a mid-round pick. And there's a bunch of other ones. So they've done a good job. They've got a bunch of guys who are going to hear their name called. And it sounds like that's, it's kind of just the beginning there. Anytime you have the first overall pick in a draft, which we assume they will, and Elijah Arroyo is going to go in the top 50 picks, I can imagine the social media account will have that blasted out to all their recruits in a quick manner.
Next question comes from Benjamin Rodriguez. Benjamin, you may ask your question.
New Jersey, and DJ, thanks for having me on as well. And last year we broke records at the NFL draft with over almost 800,000 fans attending the draft. I wanted to ask you, what is your expectations for the draft being in Wisconsin now, and what is it going to mean to the fans of Green Bay and everybody that's in the city over there preparing for all the festivities and everything going on in less than a week now?
I can't wait to get out there. I'm excited to spend the week out there and see how it all comes together. I've been in Green Bay numerous times for games. It's always an incredible game atmosphere with, obviously with the selling out every single game and they love football there. But I think it's going to be bigger than just Green Bay. I think you're going to see people from all around, the Midwest are going to be pouring in there. I think you're going to see people flying in from all over the country. So to have Lambeau Field as the backdrop there, and to kind of fill up the streets and it's such a cool environment when you go there. For those that haven't been there, I mean, it feels like you're in the middle of a neighborhood and they just dropped the stadium down in there. It's really cool. So I'm fascinated to see how it all looks and how it all comes together. But it's going to be football weather, a little brisk, which I kind of like. And it's my favorite week of the year. It's Christmas on draft day, and every city has knocked it out of the park. Detroit set the bar really high with what they did last year. And I know Green Bay and Detroit, they're competitive. So we'll see what Green Bay does here to see if they can top it.
Next question comes from Christian Boer. Christian, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks so much for doing this. With the Lions, do you see them as potentially being players to trade up from that 28th overall spot? And if so, is there a prospect in maybe your 15 to maybe 25 range that you could see being a home run fit for Detroit?
Yeah, that's to me, you look at the interior of the offensive line. If they just wanted to kind of fortify that, it's unusual to trade up for an interior offensive lineman. I don't know if that would be something they would do. I would think they'd probably be a little patient. Maybe that's a little baby move. Maybe that's up just a few spots to do something like that. If you're looking at other directions that they could try and go, I think pass rusher would be a spot. It's just they would have to be in love with one of these edge rushers to do that. To me, it would be just with the sheer number of guys in this draft. I think you maybe be a little bit more patient. But hey, if give you the dream scenario, Jalen Walker, everybody freaks out because he's kind of a tweener, and he starts to drop a little bit, and he gets outside the top 10. Man, if I'm the Lions at that point in time, I might be willing to be ultra aggressive and throw him into our defensive mix. So that would be kind of the one scenario I could see if you saw kind of a star that started to drop, that they would be inclined to be ultra aggressive and go get him.
Next question question comes from Clifton Brown. Clifton, you may ask your question.
Yeah, so you talked about Harmon a couple of minutes ago. If he got to the Ravens at 27, could you talk about what maybe he could do playing next to a guy like Matabike for the defensive line? And also, Starks has been a guy mocking them a lot. If they don't take Starks or Harmon, just a couple of guys that they may take at 27 if it's not Starks or Harmon.
Yeah, I think Starks would be their home run pick with kind of what they need and how he's used and how that would free up Hamilton. So, we start there. But I think when you look at the defensive tackle position, Harmon, they've always kind of had big guys in there. So he checks the box in terms of, being 313 pounds, and he's, over almost 6'5", 6'4.5". So he's a big guy who can get up the field. Matabike would be awesome person to him to learn from. Just as a pass rusher, Matabike is so outstanding. That would be a cool thing to take a guy like Harmon under your wing, who has some of the, has some great tools, but isn't quite as polished as a rusher, is obviously what Matabike has become. So that would be a good learning opportunity for him there. I like that option. In terms of other players outside of that group, I look at Max Hairston from Kentucky as a corner. That you'd be back-to-back years, you get corners who ran 4.28. They'd have the fastest pair of corners in the NFL if that were to be the case. But SEC tested. He's fluid and fast. He makes plays on the ball. He was awesome in 23 with 5 picks. If that was his year this year, he's going to be a top 15 pick. So that could be one of those kind of Raven value finds if they decide to go in that direction and just upgrade that secondary. They've got to get better on defense, and they've got to get better in the secondary. So if you give me the two names you gave me, if Harmon was there and Starks were there, I would think they would end up going Starks just to try and clean up some stuff on the back end.
Next question comes from Anthony Cosenza. Anthony, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, greatly appreciate the insight and knowledge today. Appreciate your time. A couple of players or some things from a Bengals perspective. Number one, Jihad Campbell, where you kind of see him going, given some of the stuff going on and potential fit with the Bengals there. And then maybe some day 2 safeties that you think would be good fits for the Bengals as they try and rebuild that defense.
Yeah, to me, it's all defensive draft. I mean, you have to go on that side of the ball heavy. And, I'd be shocked if they don't do that. Jihad Campbell, I know he's really physically beat up, coming into the process. So you got to have your medical group be comfortable there that he's going to be fine. And once we get to the season, but to me, he's dynamic. He's versatile, off the ball, on the ball, big time speed. He, for a team that's going to be playing against Baltimore and trying to climb that mountain every year, I think he matches up well with them. When you think about somebody who could, he can come downhill and get Derrick Henry on the ground. You could spy him against Lamar, and he can close down and try and suck him up on the perimeter. And then if you want to, you can let him rush off the edge. So he can do a lot of different things. I think he would be a heck of a pick there if he were to get to pick number 17. In terms of safeties on day 2, a couple interesting guys. Kevin Winston from Penn State, I like. I think there's value because he missed time with only playing 2 games this year. But you get a nice package of height, weight, speed. He's aggressive. He's good versus the run. You go back to the 23 tape. I think there's a lot to like about him. So that would be one. One of my personal favorites is I have him kind of in that 3rd round range. Maybe teams maybe more so in that 4-5 range, but I'm a Craig Woodson guy from Cal. So I love him. I think he's a day 1 starter. He's, 6 foot, 200 pounds, ran 4.45. He's smart. He's a great leader. He's a little bit older. He's played a ton of football though. Smooth mover. He's an excellent tackler, and he gets his hands on the football. So, and Cal's also been a sneaky safety factory. So that's one that I kind of like down a little bit below that tier. And then Makuba from Texas is another good one who takes the ball away. Not the biggest guy in the world, but really, really good ball skills and takes it away.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Casey Kinnaman. Casey, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. It feels like all the momentum is pointing towards the Browns selecting Travis Hunter with the 2nd overall selection. What do you believe the Browns' plan for Hunter should be to maximize his skill set and the impact he's going to be able to make as a rookie?
I would start offense. I'm kind of saying that through this process. It's different. First of all, we haven't seen something like this, who's someone who wants to do everything on both sides. I don't think I would do that initially. I think you have to major and minor. And, historically, if you have a player that has value there, he's been a full-time defensive player with a package of plays on offense. That's just been it's the way it's always been. We haven't really seen it the other way around, with the exception of maybe Troy Brown on a couple snaps for the Patriots. But to me, I think he's more valuable to your team on offense right now. I think he's further developed on offense. I think he touches the ball more. He just makes more of an impact. So I'm going to have him as a full-time starter at receiver, and we'll start there for a while, and then we can start maybe incorporating him into some defensive, packages if that's your dime, your nickel, whatever, but giving him, an opportunity to get on the field, make some plays on some 3rd downs defensively. And maybe that grows and evolves into more than that over time, but that's where I would start with it. And I think you can get really excited if you're a Browns fan and you start thinking about, what Jerry Jeudy did last year. And now we get a chance to throw Travis Hunter out there on offense as a really, really talented, explosive player who's outstanding with the ball in his hands. That would make the Browns really, really fun to watch. I can tell you that.
Next question comes from question comes from Jim Alexander. Jim, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ. This might be a silly question, but it's a draft philosophy sort of question. In a given year, there's nearly 300 players that could be drafted, 30 NFL front offices, and all these sort of scouts throughout the year. How does the league come up with a consensus of like these are the top 20 players versus individual scouts thinking maybe a guy that's ranked in a 3rd round, like we feel this guy's the best player in the draft? Why don't we ever see these sort of reaches, quote unquote, and these players are always sort of basically by the league sort of grouped in as these are the top 1st round picks versus these shots by teams taking guys that might not be ranked in the first couple rounds thinking that they might be the best actual players? And we've seen undrafted guys become Hall of Famers too. So
yeah, no, I look, I think there's natural, it's just natural. If you're making that selection, you have a lot of love for a player who doesn't have any love around the league. And you sit there and go, well, we have him valued here, but if we take him when the league does not value him there and his reputation does not put him there, and we miss, we're the bumbling idiots. We took the guy that everybody said wasn't any good and we stepped outside the box, and you'll get crucified. Whereas you take the guy who's universally valued there around the league and publicly, and you miss on him, and you don't get quite as much grief. You say, well, it just didn't work out, but man, we all thought he was going to be good and it didn't work out. So I think some of it is the fear of the reaction, and it's just human nature. You kind of understand that, but there's some times where you have a guy who's higher on your board, and you say, "Gosh, guys, I know we love him in our room, but I don't think he's loved like this everywhere else. So we're not taking him in the 3rd round. We're going to take this other player who won't be there when we pick again in the 4th round." Knowing that the guy that we have higher, we're the Lone Ranger on. And I've been in rooms where we've done that, and that guy has still been there. We've taken him in the 4th round, and we bring the guys in, and one's introduced as your 3rd round pick, one's introduced as your 4th round pick. And the irony is we had the 4th round pick with a higher grade than the 3rd round pick. So some of it is just trying to find value on the board and knowing what the consensus is. But I also think, especially in regards to the 1st round, outside the box, when they don't work out, it's not a good look, and it doesn't end well.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
Next question comes from Joe Clark. Joe, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. Pittsburgh at 21 obviously could be a landing spot for a quarterback. They have a big need along the defensive line. So how would you kind of evaluate taking a swing on a quarterback if it meant passing on someone like Derek Harmon or Kenneth Grant if they were still on the board?
It's just going to come down to, how comfortable they are. Do they have, is there kind of some PTSD from, going the Kenny Pickett route in this range of the draft and it not working out? I would just say, if you have conviction on one of those quarterbacks, if Shedeur Sanders got down there, if you have a lot of love in the building for Jackson Dart, whatever it is, if you have conviction, then take the quarterback. If it's at all close, you have a screaming need there long term. So if you have similar grades, you would definitely, the tie would go to the quarterback if you have some conviction. So that's something I don't know. I don't know how those guys are viewed within that building, and I don't know how much trauma is left from the Kenny Pickett mistake. So that's the quarterback side of it. I do think when you look at those defensive tackles, Kenneth Grant, they've been in that division. Mike Tomlin's been in that division. He's had a Casey Hampton, a big, powerful guy. Obviously, Cam Hayward, big, powerful, athletic guy. You look, at Haloti Ngata, who he saw for years and years. It's hard to find guys like that. So Kenneth Grant to me kind of matches that division and could make some good sense for them there. I like Harmon is a good player as well. So. That decision by Pittsburgh has got to come down to like or love. If you like the quarterbacks, don't do it there. If you love them, you have to do it there. So that's going to come down to their evaluation of those guys.
Next question comes from Adam West. Adam, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. As always, our friend Greg asked me to ask if I had a question for you further for your guys' quick fire round. But I told him I wanted to wait for it. The Saints at 9 feels like has now become one of the most interesting teams in the draft. And from what I've heard, they really are kind of similar to the question you just answered, are struggling with going BPA at 9 and kind of maybe taking Shedeur Sanders, who they don't have a 1st round grade on, but the need is there. You've been in these draft rooms. Can you maybe do like a little semi role play of like what both sides of that argument looks like, of like the people in the building that are arguing for BPA and the people in the building that may be arguing, to go the quarterback route? Because that's what it seems like is really.
How are you?
Is
it's 305 498
just eating them up right now in the draft room.
Yeah. First of all, I think somebody's unmuted. There we go. Here's the conversation. It's pretty simple. It's on the pro side of taking the quarterback there. It's okay. We might not have huge grades on the quarterback, but he's better than anyone else we have on our roster at that position. He upgrades us. We have time. We're in a new regime here. We've got time to let this quarterback, if we think he can grow and develop and continue to get better, we can grow with him. So, that's the argument for taking one. The other side of it is, well, what are we going to do if we don't have big grades on him? Then we're going to be in this exact same situation 3 years from now when we come to the realization that, he is who we thought he was if we don't have him graded highly and we're looking to replace him. We're in year 1. Again, same scenario, different logic. We're in year 1. We don't have to do this right now. Let's get a sure thing. It's our first pick with this, new setup here with Kellen Moore. Let's get a player that's going to help us and plug and play. We have big grades on. There's consensus on them, and we can take a flyer on one of these quarterbacks, later on in the draft, and take someone who, we like to work with and can be developmental, while also leaving open the option that we could go that route next year when we might like a quarterback better. So those are the types of conversations that take place in that room. And it's usually coaches, they want someone who can come in and help us right now. Personnel is thinking a little bit more long term. So yeah, I think that's where the battle comes.
Thanks,
Next question comes from Cody in Green Bay. Cody, you may ask your question. Cody, you may ask your question. Please unmute. All right, we'll go to the next one. Next question comes from Amanda Godsey. Amanda, you may ask your question.
Hi, DJ. Thanks for doing this. For the Steelers, how does them not having a second-round pick affect what they do in the first, and who do you see them targeting in the third round?
In terms of how it affects them, well, I mean, obviously they're not. There's a scenario you can look at it and say, well, if they say they love Shedeur Sanders and they were worried about New Orleans being an option, man, you're going to have to part with some heavy artillery in next year's draft because you don't have a 2 this year. So that's the first thing of how it could impact them. I think it limits their ability to move up. It would be very costly for them to move up with next year's draft. So that's one side of it. To me, if they aren't in love with a quarterback, I could see them being a team that's more than available and ready and willing to move back to try and get more in that range. Some of these needs that they have could be filled in that top of the second round range, and then get some extra picks as well. So, I think it restricts them a little bit in terms of going up. They make them more likely to move back. If you're going to stick and pick and you're going to pick in the first, then you're going to come around and pick in the third. To me, I would love to see them get a running back. If that was, part of their calculus is a defensive tackle and a running back. I actually think they're pretty covered either way. I think there's going to be guys at both positions in the third round. They happen to be 2 of the deeper positions in the draft. So I think at that point in time, if you have say a Travion Henderson or say Omarion Hampton were to get there, you have Omarion Hampton and Kenneth Grant or, Derek Harmon, whoever you have higher graded on your board, I think you just take them because I think there's going to be other backs. You can get a Dylan Sampson in the third round out of Tennessee as a running back. You could get Tootin from Virginia Tech in the third round. Defensive tackle wise, there's going to be guys at that position as well in round number 3. So I think I don't think it impacts them. I think they can just take the highest rated player and they'll still have options in the third round that could come in and help them. Like defensive tackle wise, you're looking at maybe it's a Y.A. Black or see what happens with Jamari Caldwell from Oregon. Those types of guys are going to be around.
Thank you.
Yep.
We'll go back to Cody in Green Bay. Cody, you may ask your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Since COVID, a little rusty on these. So, DJ, Green Bay, what would surprise you if that they would do a 23? I guess, obviously a lot of fans are going to be there, wanting to see a pick, whatever. But what would something that they could do that would be like, wow, that would throw you for a loop?
Well, if they took a receiver in the first round, it sure as heck throw us for a loop, right? Because everybody's been asking that for so long. They've amassed a really good receiver room, but they've yet to really attack it there. So that would be one I think that would probably floor us on the set and floor the audience there, floor the crowd there. So that would be definitely ironic if after all these years we wait till the draft's in Green Bay and they went ahead and took a receiver in the first round. Would be pretty epic.
If I can ask who you think, if I might have missed it, but who do you think they might? Just a rough idea on your end.
Yeah, in terms of what they will do, I mean, I don't think they will do go the wide receiver route. If I'm looking at options for them, I think you can always look on the defensive side of the ball for corners. Max Hairston makes a lot of sense to me. in that spot. You can look at, edge rushers. Usually you just look for the most athletic and explosive SEC edge rusher or SEC defensive front seven player. And that's one that's going to pique their interest a little bit. So Shamar Stewart doesn't have the production, but man, he would match all the explosive pieces that they've collected there over the last few years.
Next question comes from Devin Jackson. Devin, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for doing this as always. For the Eagles at 32, would you think they'd be interested in taking a guy like Malaki Starks to replace CJ Gardner-Johnson, who was traded to the Texans this offseason?
I think he would be a great fit. Obviously they love shopping at that store, and he's a really, really good player who I think there's better ahead of him. I don't think he made as many plays this year as he did previously, but he gives you someone who in a pinch can play your nickel. I think he could survive outside at corner if he had to get out of a game. And I think he could be an outstanding, free safety, play over the top, roam and make plays. He's young. He's really, really well liked in that building in terms of the leadership, character, and tangible side of things. So yeah, that's I think that would be from a value standpoint and a fit standpoint would be great. It's just that, I think the Eagles, given their druthers, would rather, they always like to start big. So to me, if it's closely graded and there's an opportunity for them to get somebody on the line of scrimmage, I would think they would lean in that direction. But, if they got wiped out and cleaned up on the offense and defensive line, man, he'd be a great fit.
Next question comes from Jonathan Alexander. Jonathan, you may ask your question.
DJ, thanks for doing this. I think I saw earlier this week that you mentioned that for the Texans, it would be Banks or Booker. I'm curious, what do you think the chances are both are on the board at 25 or one? And what do you think about the choice between the two?
Yeah, I don't think they're both on the board. I think that decision would be made for them, and it might be a situation where they're both off the board at that point in time. And I would think a guy like Donovan Jackson could enter into their mix as a possibility there for one of those selections. It just feels like offensive line, and those are the two names that I'd heard connected to them that they really, really liked. So in terms of how I would stack it up, the one guy in this draft class, there's usually a guy like this every year where he kind of starts off in a range on my initial list. And then it feels like other guys are kind of moving up and moving around. And then without any rationale for it, Banks for me has kind of slipped down, but it feels more like, and I was looking at it the other day, I'm like, I need to go back and revisit my original list and see who's moved. And then see, okay, why did I have him go up or down? And he's one that felt more like other guys I had just moved up more so than he did anything to disqualify himself and move down. So when I do my final update, I'll move Banks back up a little bit closer to where I had him originally, which I think he was like my 19th player at that point in time. So he's a solid player. I just wish he strained to finish a little bit more. Booker to me is a little more physical, has a little more edge to him. Obviously you're talking tackle versus guard. At pure grade wise, I had Booker over him, but I don't know that there's a wrong answer there. I think they're both immediate upgrades.
Our final question comes from Dennis Cox. Dennis, you may ask your question. Dennis? All right, then that concludes today's call. Thank you, DJ, for the time, and thank you, media, for attending.
You guys got me now?
Oh, there you are.
You guys. Okay, there we go. Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
That's right.
Real fast. Seeing Jaylen Walker, a lot of connections with the Carolina Panthers at number 8. Why is he a good fit in Carolina? And if Jaylen Walker's not the pick, who are some other options?
Yeah, first of all, they're a team that a lot of people around the league expect is going to try and get out. There's a decent number of needs still left on that roster, and can't they parlay New Orleans need for a quarterback into scaring somebody to come up in front of New Orleans? I don't know if they can pull that off, but at least there's people around the league that think they're going to effort to do that in Carolina. So something interesting just to keep an eye on there with them. But to me, Walker, when you go into a defense that's dead last and points, yards, rushing yards per game, tied for 29th in sacks, 32nd pressure rate. He helps all those areas. He is an impactful player. You can move him around. He just would add a really explosive element to their defense. I would love to see how they could play him off of Derek Brown, and being able to, let him kind of shoot some gaps that are going to be vacated with all the attention that Derek Brown's going to require. So I think he'd be a fun fit there. Plus, just from like a leadership standpoint, a culture builder, he checks those boxes as well. So that's why I love his fit there. If he's off the board or they decided to go in a different direction, I think you're just trying to find impactful guys on the defensive side of the ball. And that's why I'm just looking at edge rushers, defensive tackles. You could look at corners. How do they feel about, the corners in this draft? I'm a Jahdae Barron guy. I love him. And I think he would be a nice athletic, explosive piece as well. So get faster on defense, get more dynamic. They need help everywhere. So that to me is where I would look.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep.
That officially concludes today's call. Thank you, DJ, for the time, and thank you, media, for attending. A recording and transcript of today's call will be made available later today. Please follow at NFL Media for updates. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great draft.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
Thank you.